The philanthropy world has many players: nonprofit organizations, non-government organizations, aid agencies, grassroots organizations, charities. The list goes on. But is it time to reform the system as we know it? Is there a better way to do good in the world? I'm Mike Walter in Los Angeles. Let's take it full frame. Vicki Escarra has been recognized as one of the most influential leaders in the nonprofit sector. She's been named in the Nonprofit Times Power and Influence Top 50 for 3 years in a row. She's also distinguished herself as a successful executive in both the nonprofit and corporate sectors. She currently serves as the CEO of Opportunity International, an international nonprofit organization providing access to savings, small business loans, insurance, and training to over 4 million people working their way out of poverty in the developing world. I recently sat down with Vicki Escarra in New York City to get her thoughts on the current landscape of the nonprofit sector and efforts to reform the system to do good in the world more efficiently. Vicki, I want to talk to you about the landscape, but before I do, I want to take you back in time, because I was mentioning to you, I was back in Atlanta, Georgia in 2002. I interviewed Leo Mullen, who was the CEO of Delta at the time, and he talked about 9/11, this defining day here in the United States, and making these split decisions and saying, we have to bring our planes down now, which had never been done before. Planes land and then they take off. But he was making all these decisions and at the same time not knowing how his wife was doing, because he knew she was on a flight in New York. He didn't know if she was on one of those doomed planes. And he said that day changed him, but it changed everyone at Delta. And I know you were at Delta at the time.
Right.
How did it change you?
So we were together, Leo and I, in an area called the Operations Control Center. And initially we thought it was one of our airplanes that was affected. And I'll never forget our head of flight operations, who actually was in charge of much of security for Desert Storm, immediately said, "We're under attack." And we kind of blew him off a bit and said, no, we couldn't be. And then, of course, we saw the second tower go down. We went into emergency mode, which actually we were in emergency mode for 3 days when all the airplanes were on the ground. And so I remember thinking my life will never be the same again from so many vectors. And indeed, we worked endlessly for a year, rebuilding security, rebuilding the viability of the airline sector, trying to convince the government to fund aviation, which is the backbone behind great business. And over the course of that year, I began to rethink, is this the way I want to spend the rest of my life? And made a decision that there was more to life, having had a spectacular career that I was thankful for. But that's when I really started making decisions about the future and how I'd spend my time.
So looking outward, but then you looked inward as well, and you chose to go to work in the nonprofit industry, which is almost a thankless job in some respects, and very different from the corporate structure. What were some of the challenges that you saw, and what is the divide between corporate America and the nonprofit sector, would you say?
So I had a transition period working for the mayor of Atlanta for 1 year, and she and I worked on a number of things, but one particular thing was education in the city of Atlanta, which at the time the graduation rate of seniors was less than 40%, and because of her leadership, the senior class graduated with numbers exceeding 90%. And so the reason I mention that is she told me I was horrible at politics and I needed to do something other than think about a political career, which is exactly right, because it was so slow. I was trying to push things too hard. But she also said, Vicki, I think you've got decent leadership skills to make the world a better place. So when are you going to go and get that done? And how much money is enough money? And that was an interesting thought that stayed with me. And so I left that time with her and started looking for areas that were focused on poverty, women, and how to make those issues better, which led me into the first nonprofit that I was the CEO of, and that was Feeding America.
Results, metrics, gauging things, that all comes from the business side of things. Nonprofit sector, sometimes that isn't in place. Did you bring that over? Was there any resistance? What do you see in terms of nonprofits? What can they learn from the corporate side? Is there something the corporate side can learn from nonprofits?
So great question. Indeed, there's something we can learn from both sides. The best nonprofits today are very metric-oriented, very outcomes-focused. The world is looking for impact, and so when you start talking to people like the Gates Foundation, Caterpillar, MasterCard, the Buffetts, they all are looking for investment and what's the return on the investment over a period of time. So the very best nonprofits, including Opportunity International, produce real results around impact.
Back in the early 90s, I was in Nairobi, Kenya, on my way into Somalia, and I was following an NGO that was going there, bringing meds to the affected communities in Mogadishu and Baidoa, and they were also going to bring farming equipment. You know, it had a terrible drought, and so they were going to bring shovels and hoes, and the guy was talking about this at lunch, and there was a young guy at the table next to us who just said, "I can't take it anymore," and he moved his chair over and he said, "It's all wrong. You're going about this all wrong. What makes you think that they can use American shovels and hoes? And why is it you think American answers?" And he went on and on and on about how it'd be much more effective to give the money to this guy so that he could start welding his own shovels and putting people to work, creating their kind of shovels or hoes that they like, which is basically what you're talking about. Why did it take so long for us to get to a point where people were talking about this in the 90s to where it's like this thunderbolt, hey, this would be a great idea now?
So I actually think this work has been going on far longer than it's received recognition, but it is taking on a different level of recognition because we recognize that in order to really affect change around the world, you have to engage people in doing the work themselves. And so when they're invested in a loan and they know they have to pay the loan back, there is co-ownership with any organization that is a partner with them. It's true, it's been true since time began.
Take me from today to maybe 5 years from now, to 10 years from now. What does the landscape look like? What does poverty look like down the road a piece?
We have a goal at Opportunity International to create 20 million jobs by 2020. We've already created 12, and jobs are powerful. I mean, jobs are, in effect, the answer to poverty, certainly with other things like education, water, food, good housing, all the things that we know. But you can have all those things. If you don't have a job, you cannot move your way out of poverty. So I don't have any question that we'll create 20 million jobs by 2020. And that, coupled with great work that other partnership organizations that we know and work with, that we will create 20, 40, 60, 100 million jobs, over the next 10 to 20 years, and that's the answer.
And when you say 20 million, there are probably a lot of people, when you said that initially, you thought, that's Pollyanna. And then, as you mentioned, you've got 12 already. 12
in the bank. It's actually 24 that we're predicting with the run rate we have, but I'm trying to be conservative. It'll be far more than that. Okay,
so there's all this forward thinking as well in business nowadays. There's social media, there's people thinking, the corporations of yesterday were these big, huge monolithic structures. You worked in one of them.
Good.
Now you go to a Starbucks and there's 20, 30 people working there. And people say that's the corporation of tomorrow. So how much of that business acumen do you bring and say, hey, we need to look at things differently? Maybe not bricks and mortar. Maybe we need to look at, changing things, using social media, looking at how maybe we can transition some of that to some of these communities.
It's a great question as well. We're doing a pilot in Tanzania in the Sagat region, which is the southernmost part of Tanzania. And we are fortunate in that MasterCard has granted us money to test branchless banking. So we're out in the back areas, if you will, with 300 farmers, and we are doing everything with them through tablets. So we're signing up for loans, savings, insurance for these farmers. We're actually showing them what their land looks like, what it would take to have a great crop, what kind of extension service provision we can offer them. But we're doing it without any bricks and mortar, and that's the way of the future. And the reason is, when you look at Africa, 80% of Africans have a cell phone. So they don't have a home, they don't have transportation, but everyone has a cell phone. And so if we can just build out that technology and utilize it, it will allow us to grow at really rapid rates and reduce overall expenses to the tune of about 40%, which is a game changer.
So one final question. You make this transition from the corporate world into the nonprofit world. As you look back, how rewarding has it been? How challenging has it been? And how do you see the future of nonprofits?
It's been the most rewarding 2 years of my life. I mean, the work I did at Feeding America was extraordinarily rewarding as well. But to actually look at changing the lives of people that have been living in poverty for years, and to know with a certain degree of certainty that they will move their families and communities out, there's just nothing like that, to be a part of that. Today the nonprofit community is about 10% of the U.S. GDP. We see that growing internationally as well. And I think if nonprofits practice solid business approaches to how they do their work, and if they really look for solutions around impact so that donors can have a degree of certainty that their dollars that are invested really do change lives, the future is very, very exciting, and we can find a solution to global poverty.
We'll leave it there. Vicki, thanks so much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
When we come back, is it time for a complete overhaul of the philanthropy world? Our next guest says the way we all think about charity is dead wrong.